The Duke of Ravenscroft made the bet on a Tuesday evening, in front of 12 laughing gentlemen. 60 days, he said. Give him 60 days and he could make any woman in London fall in love with him, any woman at all. The gentlemen roared with laughter. They poured more brandy, and then they gave him his challenge. They let him choose his own target, so no one could say the game was rigged. The Duke looked around the ballroom below, past the glittering heiresses, past the beautiful widows, past every woman who had ever smiled at him. And he pointed at the quiet companion in the gray dress, the plainest woman in the room, the one nobody ever noticed. Her, he said, I choose her. What the Duke did not know, what he could not possibly know, was this. 7 years ago, on a cold October night, that quiet woman had stood in the dark and watched him do something no one was ever supposed to see. She knew exactly what he was. And when she heard about the bet the very next morning, she smiled. Julian Blackwood, the Duke of Ravenscroft, had never lost anything in his life. He was 32 years old, tall, dark-haired, and so handsome that mothers pushed their daughters into his path at every ball in London. He had money. He had land. He had a title older than most churches. What he did not have, what he had never wanted, was a heart that could be touched. You're cold, Ravenscroft, Lord Pemberton said that Tuesday evening at the club, swirling his brandy. Cold as a January grave. That's why the ladies chase you. They all think they'll be the one to warm you up. They're welcome to try, Julian said, without looking up from his cards. But that's just it, Pemberton laughed. They chase you asterisk. You've never had to chase anyone. I'd wager you couldn't do it. I'd wager that if you actually had to win a woman who didn't care about your title or your fortune, you'd fail like any ordinary man. The table went quiet. 12 gentlemen leaned in. Julian set down his cards. How much? £5,000, Pemberton said. 60 days, she must love you, truly love you, and admit it out loud. And to keep it honest, he smiled. You choose the lady yourself, right now, tonight. The gentlemen moved to the balcony overlooking Lady Harrington's ballroom below, where half of London society danced and gossiped under 1,000 candles. The Farnsworth heiress, someone suggested. She's clever, she'd make him work for it. The widow von Hessen, she's sworn off men entirely. But Julian wasn't listening. His eyes had stopped on a woman standing near the far wall, half hidden behind a marble column. She wore a plain gray dress with no jewels, no ribbons, no feathers. She was perhaps 26, with brown hair pinned back so simply it looked almost severe. She stood beside old Lady Ashcombe, holding the Countess's shawl and fan, invisible to everyone. A paid companion, a nobody. And yet there was something odd about her. While every other woman in the room glanced up at the Duke's balcony hoping to be seen, this woman looked at no one. She watched the room the way a general watches a battlefield, calm, patient, as if she were simply waiting for something. Her, Julian said. Pemberton followed his gaze and burst out laughing. The companion, Lady Ashcombe's little gray mouse. Good God, Ravenscroft, at least make it a challenge. You said any woman of my choosing. Julian's mouth curved into a cold smile. A woman like that has never been noticed by anyone in her life. One kind word from a duke and she'll be lost. I'll win your £5,000 in a fortnight. What's her name, even? One of the younger gentlemen squinted down at the ballroom. Hale, I believe. Miss Charlotte Hale. Been with the Countess 2 years now. Never says a word. Miss Charlotte Hale. Julian raised his glass. Poor girl, she has no idea how lucky she's about to become. The gentleman laughed and drank to it. 12 witnesses. 60 days, £5,000. It was, Julian thought, the easiest money he would ever make. He was wrong about many things that night, but he was most wrong about one. Because the next morning, in the narrow servants' corridor of Lady Ashcombe's townhouse, A young housemaid named Betsy came running to find Miss Charlotte Hale, breathless with the kind of gossip that travels faster than fire. "Miss Hale, oh, Miss Hale, you won't believe it," Betsy gasped. "My cousin serves at the gentlemen's club and she heard it with her own ears. The Duke of Ravenscroft, the Duke himself, he's made a wager. £5,000 that he can make a lady fall in love with him. And Miss," Betsy grabbed her hand, "the lady is you." Betsy expected tears. She expected panic or blushing or at the very least shock. Instead, Charlotte Hale went very still. She stood there in the dim corridor, and something moved behind her calm brown eyes, something old and cold and patient, something that had been waiting 7 long years. "The Duke of Ravenscroft," Charlotte said slowly, as if tasting the name. "He chose me." "Yes, miss, isn't it dreadful? Those wicked men playing with a lady's heart like it's a hand of cards. You must refuse to ever see him, miss. You must." "No." Betsy blinked. "No." Charlotte turned to the small window at the end of the corridor. Outside, the morning fog was lifting off the London rooftops, and somewhere across the city, in a grand house on Grosvenor Square, the most powerful duke in England was still asleep, certain that he had chosen the weakest prey in London. He had no idea what he had just invited into his life. "Let him come," Charlotte said softly. And then she smiled, a smile Betsy had never seen on her gentle mistress's face before and would never forget. "Miss Hale," Betsy whispered, "you're frightening me. What is it, do you asterisk know the Duke?" Charlotte was quiet for a long moment. "7 years ago," she said at last, "I stood in the dark at Ravenscroft Hall and watched that man wash blood from his hands. I heard him swear that no one would ever know. And 3 weeks later my father was destroyed, his good name, his work, his whole life, and I buried him before the year was out." She smoothed her plain gray dress and picked up the Countess's morning tea tray, as calm as if she had just spoken about the weather. "So yes, Betsy, let the Duke play his little game. Let him come with his flowers and his pretty words." At the door she paused, and her voice dropped so low it was almost a whisper. "He thinks he chose me. He doesn't know I've been waiting for him to make a mistake like this for 7 years." To understand what Charlotte Hale was waiting for, you must go back 7 years, to a cold October night in the countryside, back when she was 19 years old and still believed the world was fair. Her father, Dr. Edmund Hale, was the finest physician in the county. He was not a rich man, but he was a loved one. He treated farmers who paid him in eggs and lords who paid him in gold, and he treated them exactly the same. Charlotte was his shadow. Her mother had died young, and so it was Charlotte who rode with him on night calls, holding the lantern, handing him his instruments, learning quietly at his side. "Medicine is simple, Lottie," he used to tell her. "You look at what's in front of you and you tell the truth about it. That's all it is, looking and telling the truth." She never forgot those words. Later, she would have reason to remember them every single day of her life. The knock came after midnight. Not a knock, a pounding. A fist hammering the door of their small cottage so hard the windows rattled. Charlotte sat up in bed and heard low, urgent voices below. By the time she came down the stairs in her cloak, her father was already gathering his black bag, and a man in fine livery stood dripping rain in their doorway. The man wore the colors of Ravenscroft Hall. "An emergency, doctor," he said. "You're wanted at once, and His Grace instructs," the servant's voice tightened, "that you come alone and speak of this to no one." "My daughter assists me." "Alone, doctor." But her father only put his hand on Charlotte's shoulder. "Then she'll wait in the carriage. I don't work without my hands, sir, and she is my hands." Charlotte would think about that moment for the rest of her life. If she had simply stayed home in her warm bed, she would have seen nothing, known nothing, and perhaps, everything would have been different. Ravenscroft Hall rose out of the storm like a mountain of black stone. Charlotte had seen it 100 times from the village road, but never like this, the great house dark, except for a single wing where lights burned behind drawn curtains, and shadows moved fast, back and forth, like people in a panic. The carriage stopped at a side entrance, a servant's door, not the grand front steps, the back way asterisk, the hidden way. "Wait here," her father said, squeezing her hand. "I'll not be long." He was gone 4 hours. Charlotte sat in that cold carriage, wrapped in her cloak, watching that side door. And this is what she saw, the pieces she would carry for 7 years, turning them over and over in her mind like broken glass. She heard a woman scream, once, high and terrible from somewhere deep inside the house, and then silence as if a hand had been clamped over the world's mouth. She saw the old Duke's valet run out into the rain and vomit into the hedges. And then near dawn, when the rain had thinned to a gray drizzle, the side door opened, and a young man stepped out into the half-light. He was tall, dark-haired, no more than 25. Charlotte knew his face at once. Everyone in the county knew it. Julian Blackwood, the old Duke's only son and heir. He did not see the doctor's carriage standing in the shadow of the wall. He walked to the stone fountain in the side courtyard, and there, in the freezing October dawn, he pushed his sleeves up and plunged his hands into the water. And the water turned dark. Charlotte's breath stopped. Even from that distance, even in that gray light, she knew what she was seeing. She had held the lantern at enough accidents, enough birthings, enough deathbeds to know. Blood, his hands, his forearms, the front of his shirt, blood, and a great deal of it. The young lord scrubbed his hands like a man trying to scrub off a sin. And then another figure appeared in the doorway behind him, the old Duke himself, huge and gray, and Charlotte heard the son say, in a voice that carried across the wet stones, cold and final, "It's done, no one will ever know, no one, do you hear me?" The old Duke said something Charlotte couldn't hear. The young lord's answer she heard perfectly, because he shouted it. "Because if anyone ever learns what happened in this house tonight, I swear to God I will burn it to the ground myself." Then the door closed, and the courtyard was empty, and Charlotte sat frozen in the carriage with her heart slamming, telling herself there could be 100 explanations, 1,000. The carriage door opened, her father climbed in, and Charlotte barely recognized him. Dr. Edmund Hale had seen everything in 30 years of medicine. He had amputated legs on kitchen tables. He had delivered dead children and told mothers the news. Nothing shook him. Nothing. His hands were shaking now. "Papa," she whispered. "Papa, what happened in there? I heard a scream, I saw." "You saw asterisk nothing." He took her by the shoulders, her gentle father who had never once raised his voice to her, and his grip actually hurt. "Charlotte, listen to me. Whatever you saw, whatever you heard tonight, bury it. Never speak of it. Not to me, not to anyone, not as long as you live. Swear it." "But Papa..." "Swear it." She swore, and her father turned his face to the window, and in the light of the carriage lamp, Charlotte saw something she had never seen before and would never see again. Her father was crying. He never told her what he had seen inside Ravenscroft Hall. He carried it locked inside him like a stone. And 3 weeks later, the letters began. First, the medical board in London, an anonymous complaint, they said, questions about his methods. Then his wealthy patients, one by one, sending polite notes. "Your services will no longer be required." Then the bank. Then the landlord. Within 3 months, Dr. Edmund Hale, the most beloved physician in the county, could not buy bread on credit in the village where he had delivered half the children. Somebody powerful was erasing him, quietly, thoroughly, the way you blot out a word written in error. He never fought it. That was the strangest thing, the thing Charlotte could never forgive or understand. He simply bowed his head and let them destroy him. Once, near the end, she found the courage to ask him why. "Why won't you fight, Papa? Why won't you tell someone the truth?" Her father looked at her for a long time with his tired, kind eyes. "Because the truth doesn't belong to me, Lottie," he said, "and some truths cost more than a man's good name." He died the following winter. The doctor who had saved 1,000 lives died in a cold, rented room, with only his daughter beside him, and the last thing he ever said was not her name. The last thing Dr. Edmund Hale ever said was, "God forgive that house." Charlotte was 20 years old. She buried her father in a plain grave, packed one small trunk, and took a position in London as a lady's companion, quiet, invisible, patient. But she took two things with her from that grave. Her father's words, "You look at what's in front of you and you tell the truth about it." And a promise of her own, made over the fresh-turned earth, that she told no one at all. "One day, Julian Blackwood, I will find out what happened in that house. I will learn what you buried that night, what my father died protecting. And when I do, all the titles in England will not save you." 7 years she waited. And then the Duke of Ravenscroft walked into a gentleman's club on a Tuesday evening, pointed across a ballroom at a plain woman in a grey dress, and made the worst wager of his life. The Duke of Ravenscroft had a system. He was almost ashamed of how well it worked. Step 1, the accidental meeting. Step 2, the small, thoughtful gift, never jewels. Jewels looked like payment. A book was better, it looked like attention. Step 3, the moment of manufactured honesty, where he would confess some harmless little sorrow and watch the lady's eyes go soft. Women, Julian had learned long ago, did not fall in love with a man. They fell in love with the feeling of being chosen by one. A paid companion in a grey dress, invisible her whole life. She wouldn't last a week. The accidental meeting took place in Hatchard's bookshop on Piccadilly, where, after paying Lady Ashcombe's footman a shilling for the household schedule, Julian learned that Miss Hale was sent every Thursday to collect the Countess's novels. He timed it perfectly. As Charlotte reached for a parcel wrapped in brown paper, Julian reached for the same shelf, and their hands nearly touched. "Forgive me," he said, with the smile that had once made a Russian princess drop her champagne glass. "Ladies first." "Thank you, Your Grace." She took her parcel, gave a small, correct curtsy, and walked toward the door. That was all. No blush, no stammer, no lingering glance. She recognized him, "Your Grace asterisk," she'd said, and she had simply left. Julian stood there a moment, oddly wrong-footed, like a man who has pushed a door that says pull. "A moment, madam." He caught up with her at the door. "Have we met? You seem to know me, but I confess I can't place." "Everyone in London knows you, Your Grace." Her voice was calm, pleasant, and completely without interest. "I shouldn't trouble yourself trying to place me. I'm not the sort of person people place." And she stepped out into the rain, leaving the most eligible man in England standing in a bookshop doorway with his famous smile going stiff on his face. That evening at the club, Pemberton laughed so hard he nearly upset the card table. "1 week, you said. Lost your touch, Ravenscroft." "It's been 1 day," Julian said coolly. "The quiet ones simply take longer to warm." But that night, for reasons he did not examine, he found himself remembering her exact words. "I'm not the sort of person people place." There had been something underneath them, not shyness, not self-pity, something almost like mockery, as if she were enjoying a joke he couldn't see. The gifts began that week. A first edition of poems sent to Lady Ashcombe's house with a card. It came back unopened, with a polite note in a neat hand. "Miss Hale thanks His Grace, but cannot accept gifts from gentlemen to whom she has not been properly introduced." So Julian arranged the proper introduction, which required charming old Lady Ashcombe herself, which required attending the Countess's insufferable Wednesday salon, which required listening to 2 full hours of talk about gout and dead relatives, while Charlotte sat in the corner doing needlework, never once looking up. "My companion, Miss Hale," Lady Ashcombe finally said, waving a ringed hand. Quiet as a church mouse, but the only person in London who beats me at chess. Do you play, Your Grace?" "I have been known to." Julian turned to the corner, scenting his opening at last. "Though I find it hard to believe such a gentle lady possesses a killer instinct. Would you honor me with a game, Miss Hale?" Charlotte set down her needlework and looked at him fully for the first time. Her eyes were brown and calm, and later, much later, Julian would remember thinking there was something strange in them at that moment. Something that looked almost like a hunter watching a stag walk, at long last, into the clearing. "With pleasure, Your Grace." She destroyed him in 19 moves. It wasn't the losing that unsettled him. Julian was arrogant, but not about chess. It was asterisk how she played. She sacrificed her queen early, carelessly, like a woman with nothing to lose, and he'd taken it, feeling generous, feeling in control. And then quietly, patiently, move by move, she had closed the board around him like a fist. By the time he saw the trap, it had been closed for 6 moves. "You let me take your queen," he said, staring at the board. "I gave you what you expected, Your Grace." Charlotte began setting the pieces back in their places, each one exact. People who get what they expect stop paying attention. It's the most useful thing I know about them. Lady Ashcombe cackled from her chair. "Didn't I warn you? A church mouse with teeth." Julian laughed too, because it was expected. But something cold had touched the back of his neck, and he made his second mistake of the evening. He decided to deploy step 3 early, manufactured honesty, the little confession, the thing that never failed. "You play like a man who has suffered, Miss Hale," he said, lowering his voice as the Countess turned to scold a footman. "Forgive me, like a asterisk person who has suffered. I recognize it. My own childhood was not a warm one. Ravenscroft Hall is a beautiful house, but a beautiful house can be the loneliest place in England." It was his best material. It was even in a way he never let himself think about true. He watched her eyes, waiting for the softening. Charlotte studied him for a long moment. Then she placed the final chess piece, the Black King, precisely in the center of its square. "You play chess like a man who has never lost anything, Your Grace," she said. "How fortunate you've been." The words were mild. Her voice was mild. And yet Julian felt them go in like a blade between the ribs. "How fortunate you've been." And for one unguarded instant, one instant only, something moved across the Duke's face. A shadow. A door briefly open onto a dark room. Charlotte saw it. She had been waiting 7 years to see it. "There you are, asterisk," she thought. Then the shadow was gone, the famous smile was back, and the Duke of Ravenscroft was rising and bowing over the Countess's hand, and saying something graceful about Wednesday salons. But as his carriage rolled home through the gaslit streets, Julian sat very still in the dark, and found that his heart was beating strangely, and that he could not decide whether the feeling in his chest was irritation or fascination. "She's playing a game, asterisk," he thought. "The indifference, the little barbs, it's a strategy. Clever girl, she's making me chase." He almost laughed with relief. Of course. That was all it was. She was playing hard to win, and that meant she was playing, and if she was playing, he had already won. He would simply enjoy the chase a little longer than planned. £5,000, he reminded himself. 60 days, 58 now. What the Duke of Ravenscroft did not know, could not know, as his carriage carried him home past the dark shop windows, was that in a narrow room at the top of Lady Ashcombe's townhouse, a candle was burning late. Charlotte Hale sat at her small desk, and before her lay a letter she had begun that morning, addressed to a name she had spent 2 years searching for, Mrs. Agnes Prout, who, 7 years ago, had been the housekeeper of Ravenscroft Hall. The housekeeper who had left the Duke's service 3 days after that October night. The housekeeper who had been given, according to the servants' gossip Charlotte had patiently gathered for 2 years, a cottage and a pension for the rest of her life, for no reason anyone could ever explain. Charlotte dipped her pen. "The Duke believes he is hunting me," she wrote to no one in the small diary she kept locked beneath the floorboard. "Let him believe it. Every hunter watches his prey and never notices what walks behind him." By the third week, Julian Blackwood had stopped counting the days until he won the wager. He told himself it was strategy. A patient prey required a patient hunter, that was all. But the truth he refused to look at directly, the way one refuses to look at the sun, was simpler and far more dangerous. He had begun to enjoy her. It happened in small ways, the way a house catches fire in small ways. Wednesday salons at Lady Ashcombe's, which he had once endured, he now looked forward to from Monday morning. He caught himself saving things up during the week. An absurd remark he'd overheard in Parliament. A story about Pemberton falling off his horse, collecting them like a boy collecting stones, just to see if they could win one of Miss Hale's rare, reluctant smiles. When he succeeded, when the corner of her mouth turned up despite herself, he felt a ridiculous flush of victory entirely out of proportion to the moment. A victory that had nothing at all to do with £5,000. "You're in a suspiciously fine mood these days," his valet observed one morning. "I'm winning a wager," Julian said. Even to his own ears, it sounded like a lie. And Charlotte was discovering to her private alarm that hating a man in theory and hating him in person were two very different kinds of work. The man she had hated for 7 years was a monster in the dark, a cold silhouette washing blood from his hands. That man was easy to hate. But this man, the one who arrived at the Wednesday salon with rain in his hair, who lost at chess with genuine grace and demanded rematches like an indignant schoolboy, who was unfailingly, quietly kind to old Lady Ashcombe when half of London mocked her behind her back, this man kept getting in the way of the monster. "It's a performance," she reminded herself, sitting at her needlework while he read aloud to the Countess in his low, warm voice. "He is performing for a wager. Every smile has a price of £5,000 on it. You, of all people, know exactly what he is." But then he would do something that wasn't in any seducer's playbook. Like the Tuesday, he spent 20 minutes on his knees on the wet pavement outside the house. A duke, in the street, in front of laughing passers-by, helping Betsy, the housemaid, gather up a scattered basket of spilled oranges, because the girl had been near tears. He hadn't known Charlotte was watching from the upstairs window. That was the part that troubled her. He hadn't known anyone was watching. She wrote in her diary that night, "A man rehearses his kindness only for an audience. What am I to make of kindness performed for no one?" Then she crossed the line out, angry with herself, and wrote beneath it, "Papa died in a rented room. Remember whose son this is. Remember whose hands." Meanwhile, London had begun to talk. It started as it always did, with small things. The Duke of Ravenscroft had attended Lady Ashcombe's dreary Wednesday salon, once a curiosity, twice a puzzle, 5 times a scandal. The Duke had been seen at Hatchard's on 3 consecutive Thursdays, loitering by the novels like a man waiting for someone. The Duke had danced only once at the Wexford ball with a paid companion in a grey dress, a woman with no family, no fortune, and no name anyone could remember. "It cannot be an affair," declared Lady Jersey at her card table to a circle of hungry listeners. "One doesn't conduct an affair at a gout salon, and it cannot be marriage. The man could have a royal cousin if he snapped his fingers. So what on earth is Ravenscroft doing with that grey little nobody?" At the club, the 12 witnesses to the wager smirked into their brandy and said nothing. But the mothers of London's unmarried daughters were not smiling. 3 seasons of careful campaigning, wasted, outflanked by an asterisk companion. Invitations to Lady Ashcombe's house, unseen in a decade, began arriving by the silver trayful. Ladies who had never once noticed Charlotte's existence now studied her through raised lorgnettes at every gathering, hunting for the secret. "They look at me," Charlotte told the Countess dryly. The way one looks at a mousetrap that has somehow caught a wolf. Lady Ashcombe barked a laugh, then fixed her companion with eyes that were old but very far from blind. "And which is it you're after, child? The wolf's heart," she paused, "or its hide?" Charlotte kept her face still. "I'm not after anything, my lady," said the Countess, returning to her cards. "That's what the mousetrap says." And all the while, behind her calm gray daze, Charlotte's real work moved forward in the dark. Her letter to Mrs. Agnes Prout, the vanished housekeeper of Ravenscroft Hall, had come back unanswered. She wrote a second, then a third, and the third came back with a single line, unsigned in a shaking hand. "For your own sake, stop writing. Some doors once opened cannot be shut again." Another woman would have been discouraged. Charlotte read that trembling line 3 times and felt her heart beat harder with something like triumph, because frightened people do not warn you away from nothing. There it was, after 7 years, proof that a door existed at all. She began saving her small salary for a coach ticket north. It was the following Wednesday that the ground shifted under both of them. The salon had emptied. The Countess had dozed off mid-sentence in her chair, as she often did, and the footman had gone for her shawl. For a few minutes, Julian and Charlotte were, in every way that mattered, alone, the fire low, the rain soft against the windows. "May I ask you something, Miss Hale?" His voice was different, the polish was off it. "Why do you dislike me?" Charlotte's needle stopped. "I don't know what you mean, Your Grace." "You do." He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, and looked at her, not the practiced look, but a real one, tired and oddly young. "I've spent my whole life being looked at. Envy, ambition, fear, I know every look there is. But you look at me the way a judge looks at a prisoner. You've done it from the first day, as if you already know something about me, as if you're waiting for me to confess." The room was very quiet. The fire cracked. Charlotte held his gaze and understood with perfect clarity that she was standing on a knife's edge. One wrong word, and 7 years of patience died in this drawing room. So she gave him the truth, a piece of it, the most dangerous weapon she had. "Perhaps I've simply known men like you before, Your Grace," she said softly. "Powerful men. Men who make a single careless decision at midnight and never once lie awake wondering what it cost the people beneath them. Men who never even learn the names of the lives they ruin." She watched the words land, watched them go through him. He sat back slowly, and his face, his handsome, guarded, celebrated face, did something she had never seen it do. It went pale. "That's twice now," he said quietly, almost to himself. "Twice, Your Grace. Twice you've spoken to me as if you were reading from a page of my own life." He stood abruptly and walked to the window, and when he spoke again his voice was low and stripped bare. "Who are you, Charlotte Hale?" It was the first time he had ever said her Christian name. And Charlotte, sitting perfectly still, her heart hammering against her ribs, 7 years of hatred and one terrible, unwanted flicker of doubt at war inside her chest, smiled her gentle companion's smile, and picked her needlework back up, and told the Duke of Ravenscroft the purest truth she had told him yet. "No one at all, Your Grace. Ask anyone. Every man wears a mask. Julian Blackwood had worn his so long that he had forgotten there was a face underneath. The mask was magnificent. Cold, amused, untouchable, the Duke who needed no one, feared no one, loved no one. He had built it piece by piece since he was 25, since one October night when he had learned exactly what happened to things in that house that were soft. And now, 30 days into a foolish wager, a woman in a gray dress was pulling it off him thread by thread, and the strangest part was that she didn't even seem to be trying. The moment Julian would remember, the moment he would look back on much later, and say that was the night it became real, happened on a rainy Thursday, in the most unremarkable way possible. He had taken to escorting Charlotte home from Hatchard's on Thursdays. It was, officially, a coincidence of schedules 3 weeks running. Neither of them insulted the other's intelligence by pretending to believe it. They walked. They argued about novels. She thought his taste in poetry was pompous. He thought her beloved travel memoirs were geography with feelings. And the walk from Piccadilly, which was 20 minutes at a reasonable pace, had somehow begun to take 3/4 of an hour. That Thursday, the rain came on suddenly, and they took shelter under the awning of a closed milliner's shop. The Duke of Ravenscroft and a lady's companion, pressed side by side among the dripping ribbons in the window, watching London blur. "My mother loved rain like this," Julian said. He heard the words leave his mouth and was astonished by them. He never spoke of his mother, not to anyone. It was not in any script. There was no script under that awning. That was the whole trouble. "She used to say the rain was the only honest weather," he went on quietly, watching the water run off the awning's edge. "Sunshine flatters, fog conceals, but rain just tells you the truth and lets you decide what to do about it. She'd stand at the window of the East Room and watch it for hours." He paused. "She died when I was 9. After that, my father had the East Room locked. He said grief was a servant's habit." Charlotte stood very still beside him. She knew she should say something a companion would say, "How sad, Your Grace. How young you were," some smooth, forgettable coin of sympathy. But she was caught off guard by the picture of it. A 9-year-old boy standing outside a locked room, learning that in Ravenscroft Hall, even sorrow required permission. "My father used to say something like that," she heard herself answer instead. "That the truth is simple. You look at what's in front of you and you tell the truth about it, that's all." She watched the rain. He said it was his whole profession, looking and telling the truth. He sounds like a rare kind of man. What was his profession? "One heartbeat, too." "He healed people," Charlotte said. "Was he good at it?" "He was the best I ever saw." Her voice stayed level, but her hands had closed tight around the parcel of books. It didn't save him. Julian turned to look at her then, and whatever he saw in her face in that unguarded second, rain, light, and grief, and something older and harder underneath, it went through him like a current. Without deciding to, without thinking at all, he reached out and took the heavy parcel of books from her arms, the way a man does for a woman. He stopped the thought, too late. The thought had already finished itself. The way a man does for a woman he loves. Standing under a milliner's awning in the rain, holding 6 pounds of Lady Ashcombe's novels, the Duke of Ravenscroft, who had wagered £5,000 that he could make this woman love him, felt the ground quietly open beneath his feet. "Oh no," he thought with genuine horror. "Oh no." "The rain stopping," Charlotte said. "Yes," said Julian, who could not have said whether it was raining or snowing or on fire. They walked the rest of the way in a silence that was somehow louder than any conversation they'd ever had. At the Countess's door, he handed back the parcel, and their fingers touched, and neither of them managed the easy joke that would normally have papered over such a moment. She went in. He stood on the pavement a full minute, like a man trying to remember where he lived. And in her narrow room that night, Charlotte did not open her diary. She sat on the edge of her bed with her father's watch in her hands, the only thing of his she'd kept, and whispered to the ticking dark. "Papa, tell me what to do. I've found the door, and I'm frightened of what's behind it." Because the coach ticket north was bought, hidden under the floorboard with the diary. In 11 days, on her quarterly half-holiday, she would go and find Mrs. Agnes Prout and learn, at last, what her father had died protecting. 11 days. It would come to matter later terribly that she did not go sooner. Because across town that same evening at the club, the wager was being discussed. 30 days gone, Ravenscroft halfway, and by my count you've won nothing but chess defeats. Pemberton was enjoying himself immensely. Shall we settle now and spare you the humiliation? Julian made some answer. The table laughed, but one man at the table wasn't laughing. Lord Frederick Ashworth sat a little apart, turning his glass, watching his cousin with pale, careful eyes. Ashworth was Julian's cousin on his father's side, third in line to Ravenscroft, a man with old debts, older grievances, and a lifelong talent for arriving wherever money was weakest. He had been one of the 12 witnesses that first Tuesday. He had thought the wager an amusement. He was no longer amused. He had spent 30 years watching Julian Blackwood, waiting for the man to show a soft place, and tonight, listening to his cousin deflect Pemberton's needling, Ashworth had seen it plain as daylight. Julian wasn't stalling for the wager. Julian was asterisk, protecting the woman from the conversation. "This companion," Ashworth said idly when the talk had moved on. "What's her name again? Lady Ashcombe's creature." "Hale," someone said. "Miss Charlotte Hale." Ashworth went still. "Hale." For a moment the name was only a name, an ordinary flat little sound. And then it dropped, like a coin into deep water, down through 30 years of family knowledge. Down to a cold October, 7 years past, when Ashworth had come to Ravenscroft Hall 2 days after some hushed calamity to find his uncle, the old Duke, burning papers in the library at 3 in the morning, when the whole house had smelled of lie and silence, when he had heard the old man growl a single sentence into the fire that Ashworth had puzzled over ever since. "See that the doctor is dealt with. Hale talks to no one, or Hale never talks again." Lord Ashworth set his glass down very slowly. "Hale," he said again softly, to no one in particular, and then, turning toward his cousin with a smile beginning at the corners of his mouth, "Tell me, Ravenscroft, wasn't that the name of that doctor, the one from the hall 7 years ago?" The card room was loud, and the question was quiet, and Julian, laughing at something Pemberton had said, did not hear it. But Ashworth watched his cousin's untroubled face, and understood 2 things with perfect, delicious clarity. The first was that Julian had no idea who the woman was. The second was that this little wager had just become worth a great deal more than £5,000. For 3 days after the rain, the Duke of Ravenscroft tried to talk himself out of being in love. He was a disciplined man. He approached the problem the way he approached everything, coldly, logically, like an estate ledger. On one side of the page, she had no fortune, no family, no name. On the other side, the way she said "Your Grace" like a private joke. The way she demolished him at chess and then looked faintly sorry for him. The way the whole gray city seemed brighter on Thursdays. The ledger did not balance. The ledger, Julian concluded on the 3rd sleepless night, could go to the devil. But there was a problem, and the problem had teeth: the wager. What had been an amusement in October was now a loaded pistol lying in the middle of his life. 12 witnesses, £5,000. If Charlotte ever learned that her name had been laughed over at a card table, that all of it, the bookshop, the salons, the chess, had begun as an asterisk game. "Then I'll end the wager," he decided. "I'll pay Pemberton his money, confess the whole idiotic business to her myself, and beg her to forgive a fool." It was the right plan. It was, in fact, the only plan that could have saved him. And he postponed it. 3 words asterisk after the ball. Lady Wexford's winter ball was 5 days away. Charlotte would attend with the Countess. He would dance with her properly just once in a room full of light. And then, the very next morning, he would go to the club and put an end to it. What difference could 5 days make? Men have built their own gallows with lighter timber. It was the Countess, in the end, who forced the door open. "Sit down, both of you," Lady Ashcombe commanded that Wednesday when the other guests had gone. "I'm old, I'm rich, and I'm bored, which makes me the most dangerous creature in England. Ravenscroft, you've haunted my drawing-room for 6 weeks like a well-dressed ghost. My companion pretends not to watch for your carriage. I'll have the truth now, or I'll have my footman throw you in the street." "Lady Ashcombe," Charlotte began. "Hush, child, your grace." Julian looked at Charlotte, a long look, with no performance in it at all, and then did something that surprised all three of them. He answered honestly. "The truth, my lady, is that I've spent 6 weeks trying to learn who Miss Hale is," he said quietly. "And she spent 6 weeks making certain I fail. She knows everything of me, my temper, my chess, my dead mother. God help me. I know nothing of her at all. I don't know where she was born. I don't know how a doctor's daughter came to be carrying your fan. I don't even know what happened to her father." He turned to Charlotte and his voice dropped. "I only know that whenever he's mentioned, she looks at me as if he stopped searching, as if I owed her something." The fire cracked in the silence. The old countess looked from one to the other, wise as a raven, and then rose from her chair with a grunt. "I find I want my shawl from upstairs," she announced, though there were 2 shawls in plain view and a bell within reach of her hand. At the door she paused. "Charlotte, 6 weeks is long enough. Tell the man something true or send him away for good. Half-truths are like half-bridges, child. They only carry you far enough to drown." Then she was gone, and they were alone with the fire. For a long moment Charlotte sat with her hands folded, perfectly still, and inside her 7 years of strategy fought a war with something that had no strategy at all. "Careful," said the old cold voice in her. "Feed him the story. Use it." But when she finally spoke, she found to her own quiet horror that she wasn't following the plan. She was simply telling him. "My father was a physician in the North Country." Her voice was low and even. "He wasn't a fashionable doctor, he was a good one. Farmers, mill workers, great houses, it made no difference to him. For 30 years, no fever within 20 miles dared take anyone without his permission." A ghost of a smile crossed her face and vanished. "When I was 19, he was ruined." "Ruined how?" "Quietly. The way it's done to small people, your grace, no trial, no scandal, nothing you could stand up and fight. A complaint to the medical board from no one about nothing. Then his patients, one by one. Then the bank. Within a season, the best physician in the county couldn't buy bread on credit." Her hands had gone white in her lap, but her voice never rose. "It takes a great deal of power to destroy a man that thoroughly, that silently. Power and a reason. He was dead within the year. The reason he took with him to the grave, he never told me. He never told anyone. He went to his grave protecting someone else's secret." Julian had gone very still. "And the ones who did it," he said, "you know who they were." Charlotte raised her eyes to his. Here it was, the cliff's edge. "One more sentence, it was your house, it was your father. I stood in your courtyard and watched you wash blood from your hands, one sentence. And 7 years of waiting would be spent, all at once, like a match." She looked at his face, and what stopped the sentence in her throat was this: he looked sick, not guarded, not guilty. Sick, the way a man looks when a story lands too close to a wound of his own. "Powerful men," she said finally. "Protecting a house's good name, that's all I've ever known." "Then they're monsters," Julian said. He said it flatly, immediately, with a raw contempt that no actor could counterfeit, and something in Charlotte's chest, some load-bearing wall that had stood for 7 years, cracked from top to bottom. "He doesn't know." The thought arrived whole, terrifying, unwanted. He was there, his hands were red in that fountain, and yet he doesn't know what was done to my father. It's not possible. I saw him. I saw him. And still. "Miss Hale, Charlotte." He had crossed the room without her noticing. He was kneeling by her chair now, the untouchable Duke of Ravenscroft, on one knee on his hostess's carpet like a supplicant, and his voice was wrecked and gentle. "Listen to me. Whoever they were, whatever house thought a doctor's life was a fair price for its precious name, they were wrong, and the world they belonged to is wrong, and I would tear it down brick by brick before I'd let it touch you again. Do you hear me? I swear it on my mother's grave. No one will ever hurt you again. No one will ever know," said the young man in the courtyard, 7 years ago, with blood on his hands. "No one will ever hurt you again," said the same man now, on his knees with his heart in his eyes. Charlotte looked down at him and could not speak. He was close enough that she could see the rain gray of his eyes, close enough to feel the warmth of him. His hand had found hers, and she had not taken it back, and the whole room had gone quiet as held breath. He leaned in slowly, the way a man moves when he's certain and terrified at once, and she felt herself against 7 years, against her father's grave, against every page of the diary under the floorboard, begin to lean toward him too. The clock on the mantel struck 9. Charlotte stood up so fast her chair scraped. "The Countess needs me," she said, to the fire, to the wall, to no one. "Good night, Your Grace." She was gone before he reached the door. That night at the top of the house she did not cry. She was long past the age of it, she told herself, crying anyway. She pulled the diary from beneath the floorboard and wrote one line, the shortest entry of 7 years. "Either I have hated an innocent man, or I am falling in love with a guilty one. God help me, I no longer know which is worse." Then she looked at the coach ticket. 8 days now. 8 days until Mrs. Agnes Prout and the truth, whichever truth it turned out to be. She would not get 8 days. The truth did not wait for Charlotte's coach ticket. The truth came to her 3 days later on a Sunday evening, wrapped in a black traveling cloak. Betsy found her in the linen room. "Miss Hale, there's a woman at the kitchen door asking for you. Won't give a name. Elderly and miss, she looks ill asterisk. She says," Betsy hesitated, "she says to tell you she's the one who's been sending back your letters." Charlotte's heart stopped. The woman sitting by the kitchen fire was perhaps 70, thin as paper, with the gray face of someone who has been ill a long time and has stopped pretending otherwise. But her back was straight, and her eyes, when they found Charlotte, were sharp and steady and full of 40 years of running great houses. "So," said Mrs. Agnes Prout, "you're Dr. Hale's girl." They faced each other in Charlotte's narrow room at the top of the house, the candle between them. "You shouldn't have written to me," the old housekeeper said. "I burned the first letter. I burned the second. The third I couldn't burn." She drew a folded paper from her cloak, Charlotte's own letter, and laid it on the table. "You wrote that your father died believing in a truth he never told you, that you'd spent 7 years hating the man you saw in that courtyard. And I thought, God forgive me, I thought, the doctor's own daughter has spent 7 years hating the wrong man. And I couldn't carry it any more. I'm dying, Miss Hale. The doctors give me till spring. I'll not stand before God with this still sewn up inside me." Charlotte sat down slowly. "Then tell me, all of it. I saw the blood. I heard the scream. I heard him swear no one would ever know." "You saw the truth," said Mrs. Prout. "You just read it in the wrong direction." And by candlelight, in a voice worn thin but steady, she told it. There was a girl in service at the hall, Rose, 19 that autumn, a laundry maid, a sweet singing slip of a thing, and she had the old Duke's eyes. The housekeeper's mouth tightened. Because she was his natural daughter by a maid he'd turned out 20 years before. The mother died, the girl came looking for a place, knowing nothing. But he knew. He'd look at her across the courtyard like a man looking at a debt he'd never paid. That October, a London lawyer wrote to the hall. The mother, before she died, had sworn papers, the girl's parentage, dates, names. The old Duke was in negotiations for the young master's marriage then, a colossal match, a royal cousin. A bastard daughter in the laundry with proof. It would have burned the whole arrangement down. That night he'd been drinking since noon. He called the girl to the east wing, alone. Mrs. Prout's hands, folded in her lap, were trembling now. "I heard it from the floor below, Miss Hale. I'll hear it till I die. He meant to frighten her into signing away the papers, and she wouldn't. She didn't even understand what he wanted and his temper. I'd served that man 30 years. I knew his tempers. This was not temper. When we dared go up, he was standing over her with his cane broken in 2 pieces, and that child was on the floor, and there was so much blood we all thought." The old woman stopped, gathered herself. "The scream you heard was mine." The candle flickered. Charlotte could not breathe. And then the young master came. Mrs. Prout's voice changed, steadied, warmed like a hand finding a rail. "Lord Julian, He'd been in London. He came home that night by chance, chance asterisk, Miss Hale, 10 minutes later, and there'd have been nothing to save. He took the stairs 3 at a time. And I watched a boy of 25 put himself between that girl and his own father, between that broken cane and that child. And I heard him say, in a voice I still dream about, "Touch her again, and I will see you hanged, title and all." His father told him what she was, told him coldly, like reading a bill of sale, "She's my byblow and my ruin, and she'll be dealt with." And the young master looked down at this half-dead girl, this sister he'd never known he had, and he picked her up off the floor with his own hands. Off the floor in his arms, down the servant's stair. That's the blood you saw, Miss Hale. That's what he was washing from his hands at the fountain. His sister's blood from carrying her. Charlotte was crying now silently, without noticing. He sent for the nearest doctor and swore us all to secrecy because he'd understood, quicker than any of us, the true danger. The girl had seen nothing but fists and darkness. She was no threat awake or asleep. But the old Duke, sober in the morning, with lawyers and money and no soul at all, if he knew she lived, if he knew where she lay healing, he'd finish quietly what he'd started in rage. There are accidents, Miss Hale, in great houses. Fevers. Disappearances. So the young master did the only thing that could save her. He told his father she was dead, Charlotte whispered. He told his father she was dead, Mrs. Prout nodded. It's done. No one will ever know. Those words saved that girl's life. His father took it to mean the scandal was buried. It meant a heartbeat was still beating. And 3 days later I left service with a pension nobody could explain and a niece nobody had ever met. And I've kept Rose these 7 years in a cottage in the North Country, alive and mended and singing again, on the young master's money and the young master's silence. He's visited her twice a year, every year in secret. He was there at Michaelmas. She calls him brother. The candle burned. Somewhere below, the great house creaked and settled. Charlotte sat with 7 years collapsing around her like a building coming down, the courtyard, the blood, the vow, all of it the same, all of it true, and all of it read in the right direction, the record of the only decent man in that entire house. But there was one more room in the ruin, and she made herself walk into it. My father, she said, my father saved her, and 3 weeks later he was destroyed. Was that, her voice cracked at last, did Julian. Now you listen to me, girl, because I'm only strong enough to say this once. The old woman leaned forward and took Charlotte's hands in her cold, dry ones. That was the old Duke, alone. He couldn't be sure what your father had seen or guessed in that room, so he did what such men do, he erased him. Quietly, thoroughly, with letters and money and never a fingerprint. And your father let him. Her grip tightened. Do you understand what I'm telling you? Your father worked out in one night what it took me weeks to see. He knew that if he fought, if he made noise, demanded hearings, told the truth, the first question anyone would ask is what happened at Ravenscroft Hall. And the answer to that question was a girl who was supposed to be dead. Your father chose. His good name or that child's life. He never hesitated, and he never told a living soul, not even you. Especially not you, because you'd have fought for him, and fighting was the one thing that could kill her. The truth doesn't belong to me, Lottie. Some truths cost more than a man's good name. God forgive that house. And Julian, Charlotte said when she could speak, Julian never knew what was done to my father. The young master was in London within the week, arranging Rose's whole hidden life. His father told him the doctor had been paid handsomely and sent on. Why would he doubt it? He never learned your father's fate, I'd stake my soul on it. He never even learned your father's asterisk name. The old woman reached into her cloak one final time. But your father knew everything. And your father, Miss Hale, was a man who wrote things down. She laid on the table a letter, sealed, brittle with age. On the front, in the strong, careful hand Charlotte would have known anywhere among 10,000. To be opened only if the girl should ever need the truth told. E.H. He gave it to me the night he treated her, Mrs. Prout said, rising slowly, gathering her cloak like a woman finishing a 40-year shift. In case the day ever came when the truth could save her instead of kill her, I've carried it 7 years. At the door she paused and looked back at Charlotte with something almost gentle in her worn face. You wrote in your letter that you wanted a weapon against the Duke of Ravenscroft. There it is, on the table. But I think you'll find, Miss Hale, that you're holding something else entirely. What? Charlotte whispered. The proof, said Mrs. Agnes Prout, that your father and the man you hate spent 7 years keeping the same promise. Then she was gone, down the servants' stair into the dark. And Charlotte Hale sat alone at the top of the house with her father's last letter in her hands, hands that would not stop shaking, and understood, with a clarity that felt like drowning, 3 things at once. That the man she had sworn to destroy was the man her father had died protecting. That she loved him. That she had perhaps been falling toward him since the moment he knelt on wet pavement to gather a housemaid's oranges. And that tomorrow night was Lady Wexford's winter ball, where she would find him, and take his hands, and tell him everything at last. She fell asleep near dawn with the letter unopened on her breast, and for the first time in 7 years, her dreams were quiet. It was the last quiet she would have for a long while. Because tomorrow night, at Lady Wexford's ball, someone else was also planning to tell the truth. His version of it. In front of everyone. Lady Wexford's winter ball was the kind of evening London remembered for a season. This one, London would remember for a generation. 500 candles, an orchestra brought from Vienna, and at 10:30, the Duke of Ravenscroft dancing a waltz with a companion in a grey silk dress, while the whole glittering room pretended not to stare. Neither of them noticed the staring. That was the remarkable thing. Julian had entered that ballroom with a speech in his breast pocket, not written on paper but written all the same. Tomorrow I end the wager. Tomorrow I confess it and pay for it and ask her to forgive a fool. Tonight I only dance with her. And Charlotte had entered with her father's unopened letter sewn into the lining of her only evening gloves, and a truth of her own rehearsed all day, after the ball. On the steps under the winter sky, I'll tell him everything, who I am, what I saw, how wrong I read him, everything. 2 confessions, circling each other around a ballroom floor, each of them waiting for midnight. You're quiet tonight, Miss Hale, Julian said as they turned. I'm rehearsing something, Your Grace. So am I, he smiled, and it was the new smile, the one with no armor in it at all. Shall we trade, yours for mine? Tomorrow, she said, and her heart was so absurdly light that she smiled back, fully, freely, for the first time in 7 years, and half the room saw it, and the whisper ran along the walls like fire along a fuse. Neither of them saw Lord Frederick Ashworth watching from the colonnade, turning a glass of champagne he never drank, waiting, as he had waited all his careful, patient, overlooked life, for the exact right moment. The waltz ended, the dancers applauded the orchestra, and into that little silence Ashworth's voice fell like a blade. A toast! He was standing on the second step of the grand staircase, glass raised high, smiling the smile of a man unwrapping a gift. Ladies and gentlemen, your indulgence. A toast to my cousin, the Duke of Ravenscroft, on the eve of his great victory. The room chuckled, uncertain. Julian went very still. Ashworth, he said quietly, don't. Oh, but modesty doesn't suit you, cousin, not when you're about to win £5,000. Ashworth's voice rang off the chandeliers, bright and merciless. Ladies and gentlemen, you've all been wondering, the whole town's been wondering, what our cold Duke sees in Lady Ashcombe's little grey companion. Wonder no more. It was a * wager, my friends. Sworn at the club before 12 witnesses, I was won 60 days to make any woman in London fall in love with him. And out of all the beauties in England, he swung his glass toward Charlotte like a weapon. He chose her asterisk as the easiest mark in the room. The silence lasted 1 full second, Then 500 people made the sound that Charlotte would hear in her sleep for years. A single, indrawn, delighted gasp, the sound of a crowd smelling blood. "Every flower, madam," Ashworth said, gently now, almost kindly, looking straight at Charlotte across the frozen room. "Every book, every dance, every word. Did you truly think the Duke of Ravenscroft loved you? You were a bet, Miss Hale, a line in a betting book between the horses and the cards. And here is the cruelest thing, the thing no one in that ballroom could have understood. Charlotte had known. She had known from the second morning. She had built her whole campaign on knowing, had written it in her diary with a steady hand. Let him come. The wager had been her door into his world, her weapon, her private joke at his expense. But that was before the rain under the milliner's awning, before the oranges, before no one will ever hurt you again. Before last night, when an old woman by candlelight had handed her back 7 years and shown her the man underneath. She had walked into this ballroom armored in knowledge and discovered, in front of 500 witnesses, that somewhere in the last 60 days the armor had been quietly removed, piece by piece, by her own hands. Knowing a blade is coming, it turns out, is not the same as being made of stone. The room swam. The candles smeared into long golden streaks. Somewhere Lady Ashcombe was struggling up from her chair, cane cracking against the floor, shouting something furious that Charlotte couldn't hear over the roaring in her ears, and every lorgnette in London was raised, and the whispers were already running. The companion, a wager, oh, the poor creature, oh, how delicious. Charlotte, Julian was in front of her, white to the lips. Charlotte, look at me. It was true, the wager was true, and it was vile, and I own it, but you must hear the rest. 60 days ago I was a man who thought love was a card game. You know what his voice cracked in front of 500 people, and he did not care. The wager died weeks ago. I was ending it tomorrow. I swear it on my mother's grave. Everything after the rain was real. Your Grace. Charlotte's voice was very quiet, and it cut through the ballroom like a wire through wax. The room hushed to hear it. She stood extraordinarily straight. Grief, when it is old enough, stands straight, and she looked at him with dry, clear, terrible eyes. You should know that I never blamed you for the wager, she said. A wager is what men like you do to pass the time. No, you'll want to know the real joke, and you've earned it. She stepped close, so that only he could hear, and what she said next she said in a whisper that would divide his life in two. My name is Charlotte Hale. My father was Dr. Edmund Hale, the doctor your house summoned in the dark, 7 years ago this October, and then erased from the earth. I was in the courtyard that night, Julian. I was 19. I saw you at the fountain. I saw your hands. For 7 years I believed I watched a murderer wash away his sin, and I came to London, and I waited, and when I heard about your ugly little bed I smiled, because it opened the door I'd been standing outside for 7 years. You never chose me, Your Grace. I chose you. You were never the hunter in this story, not for one single day. She stepped back. Julian did not move, could not. His face was the face of a man in the first silent second after a mortal wound, before the pain, when there is only the impossible fact of it. The doctor, he whispered. Hale. The doctor's name was No, he was paid, he was seen to, my father told me. Your father, Charlotte said, told you many things. And she watched it hit him, watched 7 years of it arrive all at once, the way it had arrived for her by candlelight the night before. What his father had done, what her father had suffered, what she had believed, what her believing it meant, that this woman, this one woman, had sat across a chessboard from him for 60 days carrying the conviction that he was a monster, and he had never once felt the blade at his throat. Charlotte, he reached for her hand. Don't, one word. It stopped him like a wall. Her composure held, it held magnificently. In front of all London it held, but her eyes, for one instant, were the eyes of the girl in the cold carriage, and her voice dropped to something barely human. Last night I learned something that broke my heart worse than any wager could, and I came here tonight to tell you everything, everything under the winter sky, like a fool from one of the Countess's novels. That is the last thing I will ever tell you, Your Grace. You were one day late. You have been, it turns out, one day late for 7 years. She turned. The crowd parted for her the way crowds do, hungry, silent, ashamed of itself and staring anyway. She walked the full length of that endless ballroom alone, head high in her gray silk dress, past the raised lorgnettes and the Vienna orchestra and 500 candles, and the only sound in all that vast room was her heels on the marble. At the great doors she passed Lord Ashworth, still holding his champagne. "No parting words, Miss Hale," he murmured. Charlotte paused. She looked at him for a long moment, and then she smiled, and something in that smile made Lord Ashworth, victorious Lord Ashworth, take one small step backward without knowing why. "You've made a mistake tonight, my lord," she said softly. "You should have asked yourself why a nobody would take a duke's wager so calmly. Men like you always count the cards. You never count the asterisk players." Then she was gone, into the winter night. By morning she had left Lady Ashcombe's house, a note of 3 lines, a month's wages refused, no forwarding address. The Countess raged and grieved and sent footmen to every coaching inn in London. Nothing. And in the great house on Grosvenor Square, the Duke of Ravenscroft sat alone in his library through the whole of that night, unmoving, while 2 sentences circled each other in the wreckage of everything he had ever believed about his own life. "I saw your hands. For 7 years I believed I watched a murderer. Your father told you many things." At dawn, his valet found him still in evening dress, standing at the window, and something in his face had changed permanently, the way a landscape changes after a fire. "Wake the household," said the Duke of Ravenscroft. "Send for my solicitor, my banker, and the editor of the Times, and have the carriage ready within the hour." "Yes, Your Grace. May I ask where will you be going?" Julian Blackwood looked out at the gray morning, at the whole gray, indifferent city that had laughed the night before, and when he answered, his voice was very calm and very quiet and not quite sane. "To burn a house down," he said. "There are 2 ways to burn a house down, with fire or with the truth." The Duke of Ravenscroft chose the truth, and he spent it the way other men spend fortunes. He went north first, a day and a night on winter roads without stopping, to a small cottage where an old housekeeper lay dying and a young woman with his father's eyes was reading to her by the fire. Rose met him at the gate, alarmed. Her brother's visits came at Michaelmas and Easter, never in the dead of January, never looking like this. He told them everything. The wager, the ballroom, the whisper. Dr. Hale's daughter, the doctor's daughter, Rose, the man who saved your life, and 7 years of a lie so quiet that no one, not even he, had ever thought to question it. Mrs. Prout listened from her bed with her sharp eyes fixed on him, and when he finished she said only, "So, the girl found her courage, and what have you come for, Your Grace? Absolution." "No," Julian said, "permission." He laid it out plainly. The old Duke was 3 years in his grave. The only person that October night could still hurt was the one it had been hidden to protect. So the choice was Rose's, and Rose's alone. He would keep the secret forever if she wished, or he would stand up in the middle of London and tell the truth with her name in it, and she would become, overnight, the scandal of a generation. The murdered maid who lived, the great Duke's hidden bastard, the sister of Ravenscroft. "And if the truth is told," Rose said slowly, "the doctor's name comes back to life." "Yes." "And the woman you love, the truth reaches her too, wherever she is." Julian's voice didn't quite hold. "That is not why I'm asking." "No," said Rose and smiled at him, this brother who had carried her down a servant's stair 7 years ago and had been carrying her ever since. "But it's why I'm answering. He gave me my life, Julian. His daughter has been paying for it for 7 years. She lifted her chin, and in that small cottage room she looked for a moment entirely a duke's daughter. "Tell them everything. Tell them loudly." From her bed, Mrs. Agnes Prout gave a dry chuckle. "Fetch the lawyer up from the village, then, before I'm too dead to swear to it. I've held this story 47 years." She caught herself with grim humor. It's had time to ripen. Her deposition took 4 hours. She testified to all of it: the letters from the London lawyer, the drunken summons to the East Wing, the broken cane, the blood on the young master's hands and how it came to be there, the pension, the cottage, the 7 silent years, each page signed in a hand that shook from illness and not once from doubt. She died 11 days later in her sleep with Rose beside her, but she lived long enough to see the newspaper. They say she made Rose read it to her 3 times, and that at the end she said, "There now," as if she had finished the last of a long day's work and asked for her tea. The story broke over London like a thunderclap. The Duke of Ravenscroft, in a signed statement to the Times, in testimony before the Royal College of Physicians, in a chancery filing that made his solicitor beg him twice to reconsider, accused his own late father of the attempted murder of a servant girl, of the concealment of a natural daughter, and of the deliberate, systematic destruction of an innocent man. Dr. Edmund Hale of the North Country, arraigned for the crime of saving a life. He held nothing back and shielded no one, least of all himself. "I believed my father's account because it was convenient to believe it," the statement read. "A good man died in poverty for my family's name. I am spending that name now, publicly, the only way it can begin to pay its debts." Society did what society does. Doors that had opened for Julian Blackwood all his life closed with a soft, well-bred click. A royal drawing room let it be known his grace need not call. Cousins wrote letters of icy fury about the family's honor. He had the honor, he replied, of returning them unread. At the club, the betting book ran odds on his ruin. He noticed none of it. He was busy. The Royal College, presented with Mrs. Prout's deposition, and the paper trail Julian's solicitors dragged out of old bank records. The anonymous complaint traced at last to the old Duke's own man of business, voted to restore Dr. Edmund Hale's good name in full, with a formal apology read into their minutes. The Times, which had printed the doctor's disgrace in 3 lines 7 years ago, printed his vindication on the front page. And in the village where Charlotte had buried her father in a plain grave, the Duke of Ravenscroft endowed, quietly, though nothing he did could stay quiet now, a physician's practice for the poor, to be known in perpetuity as the Hale Trust. Rose came to London on his arm. He presented her not as a rumor to be managed, but as my sister, Miss Rose Blackwood, and dared the drawing rooms of England with one level look to make something of it. Half of them cut her. The other half discovered that the Duke's sister had a laugh like a bell and no patience whatsoever for nonsense, and that hating her was surprisingly hard work. Old Lady Ashcombe took her up like a granddaughter within a week. Chiefly, the Countess announced, to spite everyone she disliked, which was nearly everyone. As for Lord Frederick Ashworth, he made one final mistake. He came to Grosvenor Square with his smile and his silence for sale. Family shame was expensive, he observed, and a man who knew where more of it was buried, the old Duke's other papers, other debts, things a grieving public had not yet heard, might reasonably expect his own debt seen to in exchange for peace. Julian let him finish. Then he rang the bell, and it was not the butler who came in, but old Lady Ashcombe, carrying a letter. "Miss Hale left this in my keeping the night she disappeared," the Countess said, with a smile of pure carnivorous joy, "with instructions to open it only if Lord Ashworth should ever trouble the Duke. She said you'd come, my lord. She said you were the sort who always does." 2 years of a companion's invisibility, it turned out, had been 2 years of listening. Servants talk in front of nobodies, and Charlotte Hale had been the most attentive nobody in London. The letter contained, in her neat hand, a precise accounting of Lord Ashworth's affairs. The moneylenders, the forged signature on his late aunt's note of hand, The reason his last valet had really been dismissed item after item, sourced and dated, patient as chess. "You never counted the players, my lord," Julian said quietly, and watched his cousin's face go the color of ash. "Here is the arrangement. You will retire to your estate in Ireland tonight, and London will not see you again. Or every line of this letter finds the same newspapers I've been keeping so busy. She left you a door, Ashworth, which is one door more than you left her. I advise you to use it." Ashworth used it. By week's end he was gone, and London, which had laughed at a companion in a grey dress, found it could no longer quite remember what had been funny. And through all of it, the depositions and the headlines, the apology and the trust, the triumph and the wreckage, the one person it was all for remained utterly, perfectly vanished. Julian's men searched every coaching inn from London to York. Betsy wept and knew nothing. The Countess's letter, one had come. A single page, "I am well, do not look for me, be kind to Betsy," bore a smeared postmark and no address. Week after week, nothing. The Duke of Ravenscroft could move Parliament and the press and the Royal College of Physicians, and he could not find one woman in a grey dress who did not wish to be found. It was Rose, in the end, who found the thread. She came into the library on a February evening, holding a North Country newspaper, the small, cheap kind that prints market prices and parish notices, folded to an advertisement no larger than a calling card. "You told me once," Rose said, "that her father's cottage was sold after he died to strangers." She laid the paper on his desk. "It's for sale again. It's been for sale for a month. And Julian, the agent's notice says he's had one asterisk inquiry, a lady. He wouldn't say more." Julian stood for a long moment looking at that small square of print. A stone cottage, a garden gone wild, a village whose name he had been trying not to think about for 7 years, because it was also the name of a doctor, and the doctor's grave was there. "You look at what's in front of you," her father had taught her, "and you tell the truth about it." "Have the carriage ready at dawn," he said. It was the 59th day. The village had not changed. That was the first thing Charlotte had discovered, coming back, that a place can stand perfectly still for 7 years while your whole life burns down and rebuilds itself somewhere else. The stone bridge, the crooked inn sign, the lane down to the cottage where she had held the lantern for her father on 1,000 night calls. Strangers owned it now and were selling it. She had walked its overgrown garden once with the agent, touching nothing, and had not trusted her voice enough to make an offer. And the churchyard on the hill where a plain grave lay under a plain stone. Edmund Hale, physician, 2 words. It was all she had been able to afford that winter she was 20. She had been in the village 5 weeks when the world found its way north even here. A neighbor's London paper, 10 days old, passed hand to hand through the parish like something holy. Her father's name on the front page. Vindicated, restored. A formal apology read into the minutes. And the name of the man who had done it, who had stood up in the middle of England and set fire to his own father's memory, his own standing, his own untouchable life, spelled out letter by letter, as if she needed telling. She had walked up the hill that day and read the whole column aloud at the graveside, every word in the wind. The vicar, passing at a distance, said afterward that he had never in 40 years heard anything half so much like a prayer. But she had not gone back to London. She told herself the reasons at night, and they took turns sounding true. He did it from guilt, not love. Guilt is a debt. I will not be a payment. And beneath that quieter, the real one, the one that kept her in a rented room above the village bakery like a woman waiting for permission. I looked into the kindest face I ever knew and saw a murderer for 7 years. What right has my heart to be trusted with anything, ever again? On the 59th day, though she was not counting, she would have sworn on the grave itself that she was not counting. The agent sent word that another party had asked after the cottage, and Charlotte understood that even this borrowed stillness was ending. So on the morning of the 60th day, she climbed the hill in the cold, early light to do the thing she had been unable to do for weeks. She sat down at the graveside, took out her sewing scissors, and unpicked the lining of her evening gloves. The letter lay in her lap, brittle and sealed, exactly as an old housekeeper had carried it for 7 years, to be opened only if the girl should ever need the truth told. But the truth had been told now, told from one end of England to the other, and Rose was safe, and there was no reason left on earth to open it, except that it was his hand and his ink, and the last unheard words of Edmund Hale, and his daughter could not leave this place without them. She broke the seal. Most of it was exactly what she expected, because she was his daughter and she knew his mind. A physician's record, precise and unflinching. The date, the hour, the injuries enumerated in Latin and fury, the name of the man who had inflicted them, and the name of the girl who had survived them. Every fact set down like evidence, because it was asterisk evidence, banked against a day when it might save a life instead of ending one. But at the bottom of the last page, beneath the signature, in ink a shade darker, added later, she could tell on some other night there were a few lines more. A note for whoever reads this. In 30 years of practice, I have learned that houses do not have souls, only people do. The father of that house has none. But I watched the son carry a dying servant girl down a back stair in his own arms and heard him lie to a devil to save her, and if there is an accounting kept anywhere, let this stand in it. The son is not the father. And if it should be my Lottie who reads this, for she was always cleverer than was good for her, and I fear she saw more that night than she ever told me, then, my dearest girl, forgive your papa his silence. It was the only roof I had left to put over that child. You held the lantern for me all those years. Hold it once more. Look at what is in front of you and tell the truth about it. All of it. Even the truth that frightens you. Your loving father, E.H. Charlotte sat very still on the cold ground, and for the second time in her life she heard her father tell her exactly what to do. She was crying so hard, and so quietly, that she never heard the churchyard gate. She heard the footsteps only when they stopped, a few respectful yards behind her on the frosted grass, and she knew before she turned. She had known, if she was honest, since the agent's message yesterday. Some part of her had been sitting on this hillside waiting, the way she had once waited 7 years. They told me in the village I'd find the doctor's daughter here, said Julian Blackwood. He looked older. That was her first thought, not worse, but older, the way men look when the varnish has been burned off them. And he stood bareheaded in the cold with no carriage in sight, mud on his boots to the knee, as if he had walked from somewhere far away, which, in every way that mattered, he had. You should not have come, Your Grace. No, he agreed. I've stopped doing what I should. It was should that kept a wager alive 3 weeks after it died. It was should that made me believe my father because doubting him would have been inconvenient. I've retired should from my service. He came no closer. I'm told the cottage below is for sale. I came north to buy it. Despite everything, her chin came up. That cottage is not for you too. For the Hale Trust, he said quietly. A house for the physician we're bringing to the village. It seemed right that the practice should live where he lived. The trustees required a signature, and I found, for the first time his voice caught, I found I wanted to bring the papers myself. That's the story I told Rose at any rate. She laughed at me for a quarter of an hour. He reached slowly into his coat and held out a letter. From my sister. She has been writing it and tearing it up for a month. She wished the doctor's daughter to have it from my hand, those were her terms, and to know that she is alive and loud and terrorizing London because of what your father chose, and what it cost you. He laid it gently on the stone beside the grave and stepped back. That's the whole of my business, Miss Hale. I'll not trouble you past it. I only ask leave to say one thing more, and then you'll never be troubled by me again unless you send for me. Charlotte stood, her father's letter still in her hand, her heart making a sound she was sure the whole valley could hear. Say it then. Lost the wager. He said it simply without flinching. 60 days as of this morning. Pemberton has his £5,000. I sent the draft before I left London with a note conceding in full. I was supposed to make you love me and I failed, and it is the only failure of my life I intend to keep." He looked at her across the frost and the years, and his voice came apart and he let it. "Because I set out to teach a woman love as a trick, Charlotte, and you taught me what it actually is. It's your father, silent for a stranger's child. It's an old woman carrying a letter for 7 years. It's you, walking the length of that ballroom with your head up while your whole heart," he stopped, mastered it, failed, went on anyway. "I know what I was. I know what my house cost yours. I have no right to stand on this hill at all. But my mother told me once that rain is the only honest weather, and it's a clear day, so I'll have to be the honest thing myself." And the Duke of Ravenscroft knelt down in the mud and frost of a village churchyard, before a plain headstone with 2 words on it, not gracefully, not like a man in a drawing room, but heavily, like a man laying down something he has carried a long way. "Not the Duke," he said. "The dukedom's accounts with you could never be settled, and I won't insult you by trying. Just Julian, a man who came north with no speech in his pocket for once in his life. Charlotte Hale, will you marry me?" The wind moved over the hill. Below them the village smoked from its chimneys. Somewhere a dog barked at nothing, and Charlotte looked down at this man kneeling in the cold beside her father's grave. This man she had hated with her whole youth and loved against her whole will, and heard her father's voice, ink dark, from the page in her hand. "Look at what is in front of you and tell the truth about it, all of it, even the truth that frightens you." "You once asked who I was," she said, and her voice shook and she let it. "And I told you I was no one at all. That was the only lie I ever told you outright, Julian, so let me correct the record. I am the woman who watched you for 60 days looking for a monster and found, against 7 years of my own sworn testimony, the best man I have ever known, save one." She glanced at the headstone. Her mouth trembled into something that was almost, at last, a smile. "And he, I have it in writing, agrees with me." "Charlotte." "Yes," she said. "The answer is yes. It has been yes, God help me, since the oranges." He was on his feet. She never afterward remembered him standing. And her father's letter and Rose's letter were somehow safe in one of her hands, and the other was in his. And then neither of those things was true because both her hands were in his hair, and he was holding her the way the drowning hold the shore, laughing, or possibly not laughing, into her hair. 60 days, she managed against his coat. "You absurd man. You conceded the wager on the morning you won it." "I did not win it." Julian drew back just far enough to look at her, and the smile on his face was one that no one in London, not the club, not the ballrooms, not the whole cold, glittering world that had made him, had ever seen or would have recognized. "You chose me, madam. 60 days ago in a ballroom before I ever opened my mouth. You told me so yourself in front of 500 people." He pressed his lips to her forehead and to her hair, and said it into the wind and the winter and the 7 years, once quietly, like a man closing a book. "I was never the hunter in this story." On the plain headstone, the morning sun had reached the 2 carved words and made them, briefly, bright. And if the dead see anything at all, and the vicar of that parish, for one, has never doubted it since, then Dr. Edmund Hale watched his daughter come down the hill from his grave on the arm of Ravenscroft's son, her head high, her hands full of letters, laughing and weeping in the same breath, and knew that every silence had, at last, been worth its price. 1 year later, Ravenscroft Hall had learned to make new sounds. For 100 years the great house had known only the old ones, clocks and silence, and doors closed softly on things no one spoke of. Now, on any given morning, the east courtyard rang with the rattle of farm carts and the complaints of children having splinters removed, because the entire east wing, the wing where an old duke had once done his worst, had been gutted, whitewashed, filled with light, and reopened as the Hale Clinic. Physicians care for every soul within 20 miles, farmer or lord, and never a bill in sight. Above its door on a plain brass plate, 2 lines. in memory of Edmund Hale, physician. He looked at what was in front of him and told the truth about it. The new Duchess of Ravenscroft was in the clinic most mornings. She did not merely patronize it, to the lasting scandal of the county, she worked in it, sleeves pinned back, holding the lantern, as it were, the way she had been raised to. The old ladies of the village adored her. The physician deferred to her, and it was widely observed that no fever within 20 miles now dared take anyone without her permission. "You've made my house smell of carbolic soap," the Duke complained one evening, finding her in the doorway of the East Room, his mother's room, the rain-watching room, unlocked now these 11 months, its windows open to the weather. "You've made my clinic smell of roses," the Duchess replied. "The under-gardener confesses you've been cutting them for the sick-room windowsills at 6 in the morning, in secret, like a criminal. Julian, you are the worst-kept secret in the North Country." "Slander," said the Duke, and kissed her. Rose Blackwood had refused 4 proposals of marriage that year. "I spent 7 years hidden away, brother. I intend to spend at least 7 being insufferably visible," and divided her reign between London, where she and old Lady Ashcombe terrorized society as a matched pair, and the Hall, where she was teaching the clinic's children to sing in a manner that could be heard. The head groom swore, from the next parish. Betsy, Miss Betsy now, if you please, ran the Duchess's household with the ferocity of a girl who had once carried the gossip that started everything, and knew it. And once a quarter, the whole strange, patched-together family walked up a hill in the village, the Duke, the Duchess, the Duke's sister, and usually the Countess, complaining about the incline all the way to a churchyard where a grave now bore a proper stone, granite and gold-lettered, though Charlotte had insisted the original 2 words remain exactly as she'd bought them at 20, Edmund Hale, physician. Everything else, she said, the world finally knew. It was in November, on a brief visit to London, that the Duke of Ravenscroft returned, for the first time in a year, to the club. The card-room went quiet when he walked in. He was a different kind of famous now, the Duke who had burned his own name to clear a dead man's, married a paid companion in a village church, and turned his ancestral wing into a charity hospital. Half of London still thought him mad. The other half had begun, uncomfortably, to wonder if the madness might be catching. There were now, the papers noted, 4 such clinics in the north, endowed by men who would not say what had moved them. Pemberton, older and kinder than his brandy let him look, waved him over to the old table, the old faces, the old fire. The betting book lay on its stand in the corner like a headstone. They played a hand or 2, and at last one of the younger men, new to the club, too young to remember that October, worked up his courage. "Your Grace, forgive me, but they still tell the story here. The wager, 60 days, £5,000, any woman in London." He hesitated. "They say you paid Pemberton in full and married the lady the same season, and no one here can ever agree on the ending. Settle it for us, sir. Who actually won the bet?" The table went still. Pemberton studied his cards with enormous attention. Julian Blackwood looked into the fire for a moment, and the men watching saw a smile come over the Duke's face. A slow, private smile that made every one of them think, suddenly and unaccountably, of some woman they had once been fools about. "She did," he said. "She always had." He laid down his cards, took up his gloves, and paused at the door of the card-room, the same door, the same 12 steps from the same balcony where a colder man had once pointed across a ballroom at the plainest woman in the room. "Gentlemen, a word of advice from a man who learned it expensively," said the Duke of Ravenscroft. "Before you wager on a woman's heart, ask yourself first what she knows about yours. It will be more than you think. It will be asterisk everything." Then he went home. It was raining, honest weather, and there was a light in the East Room window, where his wife stood watching it fall, one hand resting. In the new habit the whole household pretended not to have noticed, on the gentle curve beneath her sash, waiting to tell him the last secret of the story. And so it ended where it began, with a wager and a woman nobody noticed. 7 years ago, in a dark courtyard, Charlotte Hale had seen the Duke's darkest secret and read it wrong, and hated him with all the strength of a faithful heart. It took her 7 more years, 60 days and one letter from beyond a grave to see what had been in front of her all along. Not a monster washing away his sin, but a brother saving his sister. Not the cruelest house in England, but the one good man inside it. He had bet 12 gentlemen that he could make any woman love him, and chose the one woman on earth who already knew his darkest lie. She let him come, meaning to ruin him. He came, meaning to deceive her. And love, which keeps its own betting book, quietly took both their wagers and paid them out as one. Some bets, it turns out, are worth losing. Every soul at Ravenscroft Hall will tell you, the Duke lost his, and never once stopped smiling about it. Thank you for listening to the story all the way to the end. Please tell us which city you're watching from and what the story made you feel. Don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss new stories.